Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. My name is Andrew Watkins, and I'm the Director of Programs and Innovations at Mindgardens Neuroscience Network. And I'm really pleased to be able to chair this webinar today. I would firstly like to, and very importantly, acknowledge the strength and resilience of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, who are the traditional custodians of the diverse countries from which we are joining this meeting today. I'm privileged to be calling from the land of the Gubbi Gubbi people, and I pay my respects to elders past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people present today. I also, and again importantly, would like to acknowledge people with a lived experience of mental ill health and recovery, and the experience of people who have been carers, families, or supporters. Again, welcome from Mindgardens to our Psychosis Webinar Series, which is part of the Mindgardens Tertiary Referral Service for Psychosis, or TRSP. So TRSP is a statewide service that is funded by New South Wales Health and hosted by South East Sydney Local Health District. And Mindgardens is very grateful to SESLHD and New South Wales Health for their ongoing support of the TRSP. So TRSP, for anyone that's not familiar with it, aims to improve the lives of people that live with complex psychosis. It does this through delivery of a clinical service, which welcomes referrals from right across New South Wales of anyone living with psychosis and receiving care from public mental health services. It also runs education and training programs to build capacity in caring for people who might be living with complex psychosis. This webinar series is an example of that capacity building. In terms of Mindgardens, if you're unfamiliar with us, Mindgardens is actually a partnership between our foundation members, Neuroscience Research Australia, the Black Dog Institute, UNSW, and South East Sydney Local Health District. Mindgardens was established back in 2019 to enhance the collaboration between the members, bring together clinicians, research, health services, administrators, and people with lived experience to design, research, and find quality improvement projects that can be translated into everyday practice. So with a real focus on making difference in people's lives. This Psychosis Webinar Series will run throughout the entirety of 2025 every month, so please look out for emails from us. You'll also note that in the chat, we will put there Fenella's put a little message in there, which provides a link that you can do after this presentation is done. And really, it's a survey for getting feedback from what you guys want and need in terms of education and training so Mindgardens can shape what we do. So we've had lots of feedback already, which is really important. But if you don't provide feedback, well, then we can't hear about what your needs are, and they might be quite different to what's already been expressed. And if that isn't motivation enough, you also go into a draw to win a $50 gift card as a little incentive and thank you for participating. So please complete that following the presentation today. It would be much appreciated. So at the end of this presentation, we'll be having a Q&A session. You'll notice in the team box, there's a little Q&A icon. If you can use that space to post your questions, and we will do our best to get to as many of those questions as we can. Any questions that we don't get a chance to answer, we can liaise with today's speaker to get an answer back to you by email. Please bear in mind this webinar is recorded, and we will distribute it to all the registered attendees within 2 weeks of the presentation, so please keep an eye out for that. Finally, it's my great pleasure to introduce our guest speaker today, Dr. Scott Teasdale. Scott is a Senior Research Fellow with the discipline of Psychiatry and Mental Health at UNSW, and is an Accredited Practising Dietitian. He holds an NHMRC Emerging Leaders Fellowship, focusing on reducing physical health comorbidities in people with serious mental illness. He works closely with the Keeping the Body in Mindgardens team, which is a pillar of the Mindgardens Neuroscience Network, which facilitates and supports physical health research within South East Sydney Local Health District. Scott focuses on real-world effectiveness and implementation research. His program focus has helped drive a clear role for dietitians in preventing and managing physical health disparities in people living with severe mental illness. Now, just before I asked you to get Scott to join us, what that bio doesn't say is just how much time Scott has dedicated, not only as a researcher of this area, but also as a clinician. Scott isn't in some ivory tower doing research. He has been on the ground and delivering these services firsthand, so he knows very clearly what the issues are on the ground. So without any further ado, let me pass over to Scott and control of the presentation, and we will hear from him, and you won't hear again from me until it's question time. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you for the introduction, Andy, and pardon for my voice. And apologies that just with my personality, I just wanted to make a few final adjustments to the presentation, which just to try and perfect it a little bit more. But so apologies for having you see all that in the background. But today, we're going to talk about nutrition and psychosis, and I think the key part is that we're focusing on the practical approaches for clinicians, which is really where my wheelhouse is, really on the ground, looking at implementation, looking at how we can better our mental health service. So it'll be focused more on that side and alluding to some of the new developments, new innovations, new potential approaches that might be used in the future, but that's not going to be the focus of this presentation. So this is where it all started for me over a decade ago, as a younger person coming in as a clinician into mental health. Didn't really know a lot. I mean, as a dietitian, we didn't get taught a lot at uni when I went through. We're doing a bit more now, which is great, but didn't really know exactly what I was getting myself into. What I did know is when the job got advertised and I was looking at all the literature at the time around it, was pretty struck by the physical health concerns and often rapid deterioration in physical health of people with first episode psychosis, which is led me to start as a clinician. And this is me in the kitchen. So this was the staff kitchen.
Scott,
yes.
Sorry to interrupt. I think your slide stopped sharing, so we're all very keen to see you in the kitchen. I like that photo.
Oh, I'll just try and reshare. Okay, let me know, Andy, am I back on?
Yep, just got to go to full screen.
Yeah. There we go. So that's where I started, and that's the Bondi Community Mental Health Service, where it services most of the youth mental health programs that are run out of South East Sydney Local Health District. And this is me starting as a clinician in the mental health service there, as a dietitian, providing some sessions. And this was on the back of the evidence that was growing, as I was mentioning, around the stark physical health disparities that occur in people with psychosis and serious mental illness. That is the predominant driver for the 15-year or so, depending on which stats you look at, life expectancy gap for people with mental illness, and was one of the key things that we were looking at as a clinician. You know, can we make a difference if we include people like dietitians and exercise physiologists and peer workers and a clinical nurse consultant to manage that? For me, one of the particular interests was around this idea of appetite dysregulation when people start medication, which is a particular interest of mine. Here's a very simplistic model of what happens. So people get prescribed antipsychotic medication. There's increased appetite. On the flip side, if you look at some of the cognitive challenges that people could also be experiencing, which impedes or facilitates more disinhibition around food and impacts reward system as well. And what you get is often quite a rapid, sorry, I'm not sure why it's skipping forward, quite a rapid change in weight. So people often, and if you're working in mental health services, this wouldn't be new to you. You can see it happen quite rapidly from the start. If you want a more complicated version of that, where you look at where the antipsychotics, the receptors that they've got a high affinity for and how it impacts on the gut microbiome, etc. That's the reference at the bottom that's just popped up. It gives a nice infographic and diagram around how it all actually works. What we did with people overseas that were interested at the same time was start actually talking to consumers and asking them, you know, what's their experience been? And we talked to a number of people in Southeast Sydney, in Austria and in Germany. And this is what it came out of. It wasn't just the difficulties in hunger and satiety. There was a lot of other things that could be impacted by cognition, like the daily functioning, your emotions around mindless eating, mindful eating or a lack of mindful eating, and this idea of trying to cope and conformity motives. And what we saw, or what people were reporting, is either they were eating too little, eating too much, they were experiencing binge eating, night eating, or cravings for those high ultra processed foods that can give that more immediate satisfaction of when you eat food. And what it meant was, together with all the other work that we were doing, is that we were thinking about how it's just not, I guess, prescribing someone a diet. It's really taking into the broader considerations that, you know, if you look at the wheels here, the mental health, if it's turning in one direction, could be impacting the person's dietary intake as well as their eating behaviour, and vice versa. If you can work on and support people's eating behaviour and dietary intake, then you can actually impact on their mental health as well. And there's good cohort studies that are showing that, particularly for mood symptoms in depression and anxiety with that. So what we did in Southeast Sydney, this is going back a while, is we started a lifestyle program, and this is me actually teaching one of the sessions there. And as we said, we had a clinical nurse consultant, a dietitian, myself, exercise physiologist, and a peer worker, providing both individualised and group-based interventions to young people with first episode psychosis in the early stages of them starting medication. And what we were able to find was really quite significant. So we saw a prevention of the weight gain and changes in waist circumference. in particular, which is quite critical for metabolic health in the first 12 weeks, and that's sustained up to 2 years as well in this pilot project. And complementing that were improvements in diet quality and improvements in physical activity levels as well. And what that meant was that with some great leadership from people like Professor Jackie Curtis and Dr. Andrew Watkins, and management at Southeast Sydney, they actually took this program up and implemented it across the whole of the local health district. And that meant 4 teams of what I just mentioned, which includes those 4 different professions, implemented across Eastern Suburbs Mental Health, which is linked to Prince of Wales Hospital, the St George Mental Health Services, and Sutherland Mental Health Services as well. And they'll not just as more of a pilot intervention, they actually funded this as an ongoing intervention via the mental health service, embedded in the mental health services. It has been talked about a fair bit before, so I think at this point I'll direct people to some of the resources that are now available. So on the left there is the story. So we wrote a story on this with Mindgardens to describe over about a 2 or 2.5 decade period of time from when Professor Jackie Curtis and Dr. Andrew Watkins and Professor Phil Ward and others started to really take this physical health side on as a challenge and take it head on and through to where it's gotten to now, which is quite extraordinary. So that's actually a freely available document that anyone can access, and really it quite describes what happened, how it happened, and funding that occurred to allow it to happen across that 20 plus year journey. And then on the right is the resources that Mindgardens have developed across the different aspects, whether it's nutrition, which is one that I was supporting, and physical activity, smoking, and even some documents on oral health, etc. as well. And they're all freely available via the QR code, so make sure you access them to support any work that you're doing in your mental health services. While this was all going on, I became interested in knowing, could nutrition support in the prevention and treatment of mental illness? So this is some work that we did with Dr. Joe Firth in World Psychiatry, which looked at all the top tier evidence for in terms of cohort studies and in intervention studies. So in terms of risk of one of these lifestyle elements leading to one of these conditions, that's in the single dotted line or single broken line, and then intervention studies is the single solid line. So you could see things like sleep and smoking and physical activity in particular. There was a lot of evidence at the time, but for diet or nutrition, it was still in its infancy. Found some interesting information or intervention studies done around ADHD, and you can see that there on the screen, not without their own limitations, but that was sort of the strongest evidence that was being presented at the time for intervention studies. And then for prediction of development of mental illness, there was a lot of information from prospective cohort studies in meta-analyses of these for the role of following a healthy dietary pattern and the development of depressive symptoms or clinical depression at a later stage. And you can see those odds ratios there. Since then, there's been a lot of work done in terms of intervention studies for nutrition. it's more done in mood disorders, so in particularly depression, and a lot of people have probably heard about the SMILES trial and other subsequent trials where they've used Mediterranean diet in people with depression and found really important clinical changes, and that's all adjunctive to the other treatments that are on offer for those people as well. And what it's meant is, for the first time in the clinical guidelines by Jin Marley and team for the clinical guidelines for mood disorders, that lifestyle changes, and you can see that on the right, that includes diet and exercise and smoking as well, are foundational actions that need to be taken for people with that are experiencing a mood disorder. And so at the moment, the strongest evidence, people talk about what diet is the strongest evidence, and it is largely related to depression in terms of level 2 and level 1 intervention under interventions, level 2, level 1 evidence for interventions. It's mainly around the Mediterranean diet. And this is one of the tools that is commonly used to assess Mediterranean diet adherence. Something that we've been working on for a long time is the next step in the Lancet Psychiatry Commission series. So a lot of you might be aware that in 2019, the original Lancet Psychiatry Commission on Physical Health was published by Dr. Joe Firth and a large consortium of people that contributed to that. What we've done as an extension article to that over, I think it might be the last 2 or more years in development, is actually develop a lifestyle specific one, and how in particular not does lifestyle improve mental health, but how can we implement it into mental health services effectively. So that document really, in an extensive amount of detail, addresses that, and it's going to be quite a, hopefully quite a useful document for people trying to start implement these lifestyle interventions into their mental health services. And one of the things, I just think in the interest of time, I probably won't go into it, but you can see the link there. What we've started is a live document in Airtable that actually starts lists all these interventions that people have and initiatives that people have started across all the different facets of lifestyle into a table that talks about what they did, where they did it, how they did it, how long they did it for, what did they find, what was beneficial, what was a barrier, so that people, and it's searchable and you can put filters on it. So if people, for example, want to know what have people tried with nutrition interventions in mental health settings, they can search this table and put filters on and find the exact ones they're looking for. So that's just one of the elements that we've built into this, and the idea is that we'll keep this going forward so that it can be quite a useful document for, particularly for health professionals that are looking to try and do something in their health service as well. And we'll keep updating this table. But this is due to come out in a bit over a month, so a little bit later in the year, this document, and will be good to describe how people can do things more, get implementation done more correctly, or more effectively, sorry. In terms of supplementation, that also gets asked about a lot, and something that we looked at because we were quite interested in it, again with Dr. Joe Firth, is that we looked at across high-level evidence across the different diagnosis categories, and to see where the evidence was at the time. So this was published in 2019, so we're talking about evidence prior to that. The strongest evidence that we found was for omega-3 with specific formulations as an adjunctive treatment for depression. So you can see there in the indicated use, more than 50% EPA, which is a specific type of omega-3, of the three forms of omega-3, with a formula that's providing over at least 2,200 milligrams per day. And you can see here that on the right that the effect is not going to be a cure-all like a lot of what we are able to provide in mental health, but it's an adjunctive support, again, and another thing that people can do to get some benefit. When you go through some of the other more common ones, folate-based supplements, particularly methylfolate, which is the most bioactive form of folate, you're tending to find reasonable results. But when you look at this high-level evidence, you've got to determine how much confidence you've got in these findings. And apart from omega-3, the confidence starts dropping off. So we're not really 100% sure how effective they are. And similar to vitamin D and magnesium and acetylcysteine. So the one that we're probably going to focus on the most at the moment, is just given the talk on psychosis, is we'll focus on schizophrenia. And again, we just essentially have low confidence in the findings at the moment. At one point, I'm not sure why I keep skipping. At one point, there was an RCT that showed quite interesting findings on that transition from ultra-high risk of psychosis to psychosis, but subsequent RCTs quashed that, unfortunately, so it's not something that's really taken forward. So we had low confidence in the findings, and similar with the folate-based supplements, thinking about the methylfolate version of it for negative symptoms, and largely without the methylfolate trials, there's really no evidence for it. So that's what we found, but just conscious that 2 years later, Saris and team published their clinical guidelines on nutrient supplementation in mental disorders as well. So you can see here they've got some suggested dosages for similar, so omega-3, vitamin D, N-acetylcysteine or NAC, and folate-based compounds. So if it is something that you're looking to use in clinical practice, that guideline there for clinicians is available as well. I think as sort of key takeaways with nutrient supplementation is that for first episode psychosis, folate and B12 are mandatory to be screened for if you look at the Origin Youth Mental Health Guidelines, and that's to rule out any potential contribution that they are having to symptoms that people are experiencing. And also vitamin D is routinely screened, but again, it's just that confidence in how much of an effect is it actually going to have on the person's mental health, where our suggestion is the confidence isn't quite there yet. And so when we get down to it, if there is a deficiency, you obviously want to supplement, but I'd also be looking at dietary investigation as well, as ideal to support the person. And we just, I think, need to manage expectations around how impactful these will be. And the other thing I think to note is that we're always saying that these are adjunctive treatments. So I don't believe there's guidelines that say in psychosis to, in place of medications and all the other intervention options that are available at the moment. So moving on to some of our newer areas that we've been exploring. This study was done by Grant Sarra and team at Ministry of Health, and he was particularly interested at potentially preventable physical health hospitalizations. It's a really important paper, and the DOI for it's there on the bottom of the screen. one thing that piqued my interest was this: around 29% of total New South Wales hospital bed days for preventable conditions was associated with nutritional deficiency. So for me, that was quite concerning. And this is not sort of just using screening tools. This is linked population data that they've got at Ministry of Health that Grant Sarah has been able to pull together as part of the Mental Health Living Longer project. So this is hospital data across all New South Wales that he's got this from. So when I explored it, obviously I wanted to look at this further and investigate it further. The definition at the time included things that for myself as a dietitian wasn't quite so relevant, or so things where there's anemia due to blood loss, so things that aren't necessarily because of the person's dietary intake. So what we did set out to do is look at, something that is very common, something that is kind of bread and butter that we learn in dietetics is malnutrition. And there isn't a great deal of research around malnutrition relative to people that are using mental health services compared to other people. So we looked at that from the same linked data, so big population data across 3 years worth of diagnosis codes, and this is what we found. So people that had used mental health services in that 5-year period, so the 2 year before, we had a 2-year lead in, and the 3 years of that data being analysed, 3.5 times more likely to have a malnutrition diagnosis associated with a hospitalisation if you're a mental health service user compared to if you weren't a mental health service user. And the bed days with those associated with those malnutrition inpatient stays were 4.4 times higher for people that use mental health service than didn't. We looked at a few sensitivity analyses. So first off, we wanted to know how impactful are eating disorders, or how much contribution is eating disorders contributing to that, because we had quite a broad definition of mental health service users. And if we exclude people that had were known to have experienced an eating disorder, the rates didn't really actually change, and it only excluded a smaller number of cases of malnutrition. So we're fairly confident to say there's something more going on. Not to say that eating disorders isn't important, and it is, particularly with we've got work now being done by a PhD student that's looking at comorbid or multi-morbidity between psychosis and serious mental illness and eating disorder as well. And there's quite a lot of important information that will come out over the next couple of years from that PhD. But it's just to say that it can't solely, we're trying to find reasons for it, and we can't say it's because of eating disorders. The other thing we looked at, is particularly around bed days, is if we exclude the reason for admission to hospital as a primary mental health reason, so they were going into hospital because of a mental health, they needed an episode of mental health care, then it did reduce the rates, particularly the bed days, because we know that if someone's going in for mental health care, their length of stay can be quite long. But it still means that even if people are going into the general hospital for whatever physical health reason, they're still experiencing malnutrition diagnosis codes being put on 2.5 times more than people that haven't used the mental health service, and 2.8 times longer bed days. So again, it doesn't explain all of what we're seeing here. And then just in light of the talk that we're doing today around psychosis, it's 3.4 times higher for other mental health service users. 3.4 for mental health service users and 3.5 for severe and persistent mental illness. So again, quite similar, but it's where the bed days increase quite a lot for that severe and persistent mental illness, where psychosis sits in there. So it means that we've got a lot to do around screening and trying to understand this more, and what interventions we could provide to better suit this, but also if we can identify who is more likely to be at risk of getting a malnutrition diagnostic code from that. In the interest of time, I will just keep moving, and some of the other work we've been doing is around food insecurity. So we've done 2 big data sets through Southeast Sydney, and we're looking at about in terms of the clozapine clinics and the long-acting injectable clinics, and we're finding around 40% were saying they were moderate to severe, experiencing moderate to severe food insecurity, and we're able to link it to poorer health outcomes. So it was a big concern for us, particularly if we're trying to do lifestyle interventions and suggest to people to do all these things. If they're not getting a basic need met of having good access to nutritionally adequate food and being able to use that, that it's a problem. So we embarked on a co-design process. So there was multiple workshops and interviews and focus groups that allowed us to look at the barriers, facilitators and potential solutions. So you can see that there, and then we're going to move on to the pilot program and hopefully in time a large evaluation. So I guess the way to summarize this is that the causes were quite, and experiences of people were quite broad. It fit into 3 different sort of themes that we had, which was access to food, access to services for support, access to food relief services, access to facilities and equipment to cook and prepare food, and then around education and whether it's food knowledge, budgeting, etc., that there was a need for more education. And then the third was around compacting factors, which was things like financial means. Having one of the key quotes that sticks with me is people having to choose between paying for food or medication, which should just not happen. And so the impacts to the person were systemic. Both physical and mental health were being impacted by this, and so it's something that we are zeroing in on and wanting to support. And that quote that really sums it up for me: can't sleep if your stomach's croaking from a lack of food. It's very distressing. So again, we went through the co-design process. We looked at blank slate ideas. We narrowed in through implementation methods to try and zero in on what's going to be most appropriate, most feasible, most acceptable. So we ended up landing on one that looked at peer or lived experience being involved, a financial supplement, and some sort of skills program. So at the same time, there were a dietitian and an OT at the Maroubra Centre here that had designed this idea that they were very acknowledging of and experiencing it day to day with their consumers of food insecurity at that service there, Maroubra Community Mental Health Service, and had designed Smart Feeds as a group-based intervention over 8 weeks, where they're really zeroing in on getting people into a space where they've got capacity to be food secure. And that's meant things like quite novel things like the OT doing a quite intensive assessments of their food use skills each time they come in, and see how that progresses over time. What we were able to do is take elements of our co-design, so the peer-led part, and find funding to include that, so that it extended out to have peer-led individual support. And one thing we're hoping for funding is to try and bring enough a financial incentive to that as well. So that's being led by some great people out at Maroubra Centre as we speak, and we're going to see what that impact that has on people through a process and preliminary effectiveness evaluation. Where else we're going with this is that we're trying to get access via a different avenue now. So a lot of people know Addy Road Food Pantry. It's a community organisation in Marrickville, with the food pantry being quite central as a service that they offer. It's for people that are experiencing social and economic hardship. They've got 7,000 plus people coming through this pantry each week, when they're offering fresh fruits and vegetables like pineapples and tinned foods and even ready-made meals, etc., through that pantry. And it's one of the most well-oiled machines that I've seen as a pantry. But what's happened is that people that came to the last talk have seen that Simon Rosenbaum and team have created Addy Moves, which is a gym on site there, and it's a freely accessible gym to anyone experiencing social and economic hardship, so and able to service those people in a culturally responsive, trauma-informed way, which is perfect for a lot of people with psychosis and other mental health conditions as well. So what we're looking to do is Addy Eats and have another way of reaching people, similar to the community mental health services, but having something in the community that's not necessarily a mental health service but can provide support that way. In the interest of time, I'll just briefly talk about these. So we've looked at, another thing people want to do is assess nutrition in people with serious mental illness. It's an ongoing challenge for us. We did some feasibility and acceptability and reliability testing of a few different methods, such as the photographic food record, the weighed food record, and one-day food diaries. And we can say that food diaries are most accepted, but when we look at how accurate they are, there are problems. So it is a work in progress, and we don't have a clear solution for that. But what we're working to in one other aspect as a solution is nutrition risk screening. So this has been a big project they've been working on for years, and it's trying to develop a nutrition risk screener. And when I say nutrition risk screening, we're talking other tools that might be more familiar, things like malnutrition screening tools, so the MST, that's mandatory in health services to be done. What we're doing is one that here in step one, that the risk screening that will be suitable for mental health services, so more targeted to the broad range of challenges that people experience with mental illness. So there was 5 phases, and it's great to say now that we're up to phase 5 of validation studies. So we've published the feasibility testing from Australia, where we had 54 clinicians and 234 total uses of the tool across a range of 7 sites in 3 states in Australia, and got a lot of feedback around not just feasibility, acceptability, and appropriateness, but a lot of qualitative feedback to really understand how this could work and replace things like the MST, specifically in mental health services. So we are doing concurrent validity at the moment. We're doing inter-rater reliability and retest reliability. And ideally, we're going to recruit 260 consumers to do this, to get adequate power to really determine what we're saying the tool will do. And if there's been a lot of interest in this in Australia, but overseas as well. So if you do have interest in this, because we do want this to be something that actually makes a difference or can be implemented in the mental health services in the near future, feel free to reach out to myself or the other key member organising this, which is Oliver Ardell-Young, who's our research officer. But we want validity and reliability testing finished this year, and then we're moving to implementation. Just to note, there's a few other things that are being looked at as potential ways that we can support people through nutrition intervention, particularly with psychosis. So I wrote this article a little while ago, and we explored 5 different predominant aspects, one being nutrient inadequacies, and whether that is a way that we can rectify some of the symptoms. We've talked a bit about that already. 2 of the most topical ones at the moment are the gut microbiota and mitochondrial dysfunction or glucose metabolism disturbance. So the microbiome is big in a range of different mental health conditions. It's big in all physical health conditions now as well. What we do know and what we don't know is the problem. We know that there are differences. There's distinct differences in the gut microbiome of people with different mental health conditions to people not living with a mental health condition. But what that actually means and what a healthy gut actually is still not perfectly defined. And then, looking for those level 2 and then to level 1 evidence for interventions, there's not great evidence yet. It's in progress. So people are trying things from dietary intervention all the way to fecal microbiome transplants. Around the mitochondrial dysfunction, that's not a new concept. There's people have been talking about it for a long time, and this is where the ketogenic diet has come back into conversation a lot. And it's true in epilepsy. There are clinical guidelines for how it can be used, particularly in instances of people not responding adequately to pharmacotherapy. But it has gained this notion of maybe there's this transdiagnostic approach to using ketogenic in mental disorders. So I can sum up at this point in saying that's an interesting area for psychosis, and we've certainly had personal stories and published case reports and sort of quasi-experimental interventions, predominantly pre-post designs of a single-arm intervention. But in this sense, in terms of this presentation, we're talking about clinical implementation. We don't have any level 2, level 1 evidence yet, and certainly no clinical guidelines. So it's an interesting one. Some of my colleagues that I work with are running trials to test that theory and try and get that high level evidence, and from them which we can look at implementation and clinical guidelines. I won't speak too much about these, just in the interest of time. I'll sum up now. If you're looking at some resources, so how can dietitians work in mental health? So we've got role statements and briefing papers. If you're looking at more also at the role, but how you can integrate dietitians even into mental health, or look at private practice dietitians and that referral pathway. We've got other documents that talk about that here. And more specifically, we've written about where we've sort of benchmarked where mental health dietitians are at across Australia, and that's an open access article there if you want to look at the types of roles, where they're in mental health services, what barriers and enablers they're experiencing, etc. That's a good one for you. And then there's a bit of a plug for some work from Michelle Su that is looking at the role of private practice dietitians and how to better utilise private practice dietitians for our mental health consumers. And there's other resources. These become more particular for dietitians, so you've got the Mandy resource suite, and then you've got an upskilling course for mental health that's targeted to mental health dietitians. So acknowledgements, obviously a lot of this work was done with either alongside or directly within Mindgardens, so that's a big acknowledgement there. Also, a lot of the work that this research group, Nutrition, Exercise and Social Equity within Psychiatry at UNSW, is doing. And finally, my role as Equally Well Ambassador, so Equally Well Australia, which looks to rectify these disparities in physical health in Australia. So I'm going to leave it there and pass back to Andrew.
Scott, thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. Really does display the depth of your knowledge and how much work you're doing just across a really wide range of areas in nutritional science that impact psychosis. I think, while I want to give people a chance to put any questions that they might have in the Q&A feature of Teams, but I did just want to start off with a question, and because you've given us, as I say, such a broad range of information. I just wanted to see if we could just strip it back. If you could give a synopsis of, for the average clinician or support worker working with someone with psychosis, what, in terms of, the main issue, which is going to be around cardiometabolic health, what sort of advice would you give to clinicians and support workers about where they should start in trying to, improve people's diets?
Yeah, I think that's a really important one, because it can get lost, these messages, in all the evidence I'm trying to communicate. You need to, in the age-old saying now, is meet the person where they're at. So there's no point, I learned it very early on as a dietitian working in first episode psychosis, if I'm coming in with an agenda and a specific diet I want the person to follow, then it's not necessarily going to work. So it's understanding what the person's goals are, what they want to work on, and the overall thing that you're trying to achieve is some improvement in diet quality. So, there's national guidelines or even the Mediterranean diet adherence scale, basic things around trying to improve fruit and veg intake and things like that, and reduce some of our ultra processed foods and sugary drinks, etc. That's kind of where we want to get to, but you need to be very flexible in how you approach it. So for some people, it might work better doing really practical things and just teaching people how they can prepare their food for their day. For others, it is, education, or maybe it's more behavior change approaches, like trying to incorporate some motivational interviewing. It's similar to what the message that the physical activity people put out. Any improvement is great. So, even small changes are going to have big impacts. So whatever they're doing, just trying to take it one step further.
Thank you, Scott. I think that's a really great synopsis. Thank you for that. Why don't you get to a few of the questions that people put in online? And the first of those is relates to people with eating disorders, and that concern that if you're talking to them about food or exercise or doing waist circumference measures, that could be a contributing factor to their worsening the eating disorder. Have you got any comments on that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, and I agree. Like, as I mentioned in the talk, there is so much unfortunate multi-morbidity between psychosis and, in this case, I'll be quite specific and say psychosis and eating disorders. And that's, we've got Katie Dolden doing her PhD, dedicated to that. So it is 100% a concern. So in my mind, I like to think of it that I think the person needs to be informed of, what can happen with antipsychotic medications and that. And it can be done if you've got the rapport with someone, the way you approach that conversation and the way you either do or don't place stigma and that, traumatize, cause any trauma from that, is really sort of can become an individual aspect. I feel comfortable that I've been able to talk to someone and just inform them of that. But I also think what we do as dietitians now is we actually, as our baseline thing is we want to look at not only their metabolic health, but we want to screen for disordered eating. We want to screen for food insecurity, and that helps us inform the best way forward. In terms, I think there was another comment around the measures and that, and I think, because there are guidelines saying we need to measure and we need to do this, I think could be a conversation to be had around how do we do this without causing any harm to someone that might be experiencing an eating disorder. And that's why one of Katie's, speaking on behalf of Katie, who's doing the PhD, is trying to get screening for eating disorders and disordered eating more routinely done so that we know that, how we can best approach it. And we've got another dietitian that's wanting to look more at this field as well as part of their PhD. So I think we don't have all the answers. I try to sit in a camp of where I think the person needs to be informed of what can possibly happen and what frequently happens with people, but also we need to manage that we're not causing harm. And so I think there's going to be a need to make sure that clinicians and particularly dietitians are skilled enough to navigate that tightrope. So I don't know if I've answered the question.
I think you've answered it very well, and I think it's also good to know that for everyone that Katie is looking into this, and so that we have some more, scientific-based answers about how we do actually approach people who might have eating disorders with all of these, health messages that we have around eating and body measurements. Might move to the next question, and that is around inpatient food. I probably don't need to say anything more about that, really, in that we all know that it's terrible. It's not designed for the right client population. It tends to be, as far as I'm aware, designed for people that are elderly in medical surgical units that probably need to put on weight. And I guess the challenge that's been put in the question is for, staff that are trying to promote a healthy lifestyle. You've got this terrible food coming through, and so people are tempted to go get Uber Eats and takeaways and the like. Is there anything that is currently being done about improving the choices and options for inpatient food service? Yeah, it's a really got a lot of layers to it, this one. So it's complicated. Some of the stuff that we've been doing to try and help, because I don't think there is just here's a solution that will fix all the problems, is that New South Wales, the ACI have generated mental health specific guidelines for food service, so where they're trying to balance out the what they do in a typical hospital. It's not typical hospital in the other aspects of the hospital where it can be more tailored to malnutrition, is to try and balance out the risks and have generated a list of sort of guidelines for what it should be in mental health services. There's that, but then there's the implementation of that, which when we did our audits, it wasn't great, and it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of resources to get those guidelines actually working. The other aspect is what happens with clinicians in the inpatient units and their actions, and we try to help manage that by in services and education and that.
there's been ideas of, can you restrict food coming from outside, and which I think was part of the question. And I think you're talking about people's agency there and their own will to choose what they eat and that. So it doesn't often happen that way, but it's what we can do if you've got the benefit of a dietitian in the inpatient unit helping, when the person's at an appropriate in an appropriate space to work with them, is to try and do that, try and get guidelines in, and trying to support the clinicians to try and do what they can to support nutrition in that space. There's a lot of onions. There's a big conversation around it, so it's very hard to answer that in a short space there.
Thanks, Scott. You got at least one food reference in there, onions. But unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, but we are out of time for further questions. There was more there. I'll let one of those individuals approach you directly, since they know you quite well, around their question. But please, again, thank Scott for his wonderful presentation and also his willingness to answer all the questions coming forward. There are two things that we would ask you to do from here, and they are there's a poll about this specific questionnaire, and there is also a link to a survey which is more general about Mindgardens and our educational offerings to help shape them to meet your individual needs moving forward. I would just like to thank everyone today. I think we maxed out at about 125 people on the call, which was fantastic, and very much look forward to seeing you again next month, where we have Professor David Castle presenting, which will be fantastic. Thank you again, Scott.